some Nanavira material. So in his note on Pasa, he says, on account of their structural similarity, and I'll say what those two things are in a moment, these two independent patterns appear one superimposed on the other. And when there is failure to distinguish between these patterns, the subject comes to be identified with the I. Those two patterns being, both in visual experience, forms are seen, the I is unseen. And in quite a different way, he says, objects are seen, the subject is unseen. I don't necessarily have a specific question about that, but I thought that might be a good place to begin the conversation. Maybe about, like, practically, you read that, what is to be done on account of that, you know?
Yeah, so I mean it's a correct description, but it is sort of the it's a description that kind of pertains to the end of it. When seeing that pattern, that's not how you start to kind of build it up towards seeing the pattern. That can be a potential problem if somebody just reads that and tries to figure it out. Because subject-object, for example, see, you can be thinking now about, right, subject's not seen, but you're doing that on your own terms. That already, the experience of doing that is something that you're subjectively taking, unaware of you as a subject there and then. So in other words, you're sort of contemplating what he said, but at the arm's length. So instead of trying to figure it out until it makes sense in that way, more like try to tailor, okay, so do I see the subject he's talking about? Do I see that as a phenomenon? Do I see that negative aspect of it that's always in the background, always slips through your fingers if you try to catch, to kind of put in front of you this sense of I am, sense of subjectivity. It's always slipping you. So if you try to attend to it directly, it's always elsewhere. So you recognize that it's its property. So yes, you can then mystify it, as people would do, or you realize, well, actually it can be still understood, because it does appear as such. It appears as something that's always in the background of what I'm looking at. That's just its nature. It's always going to be at the opposite end of wherever you look. So understanding those properties, seeing it real as such, as I said before, that's how you get to actually discern that subject. Now, as he describes, that sort of corresponds to eye organs and sights that you see, but really those comparisons are not as important. What's important is that whether you approach it through eye, organ and sights, or whether you approach it through like a subject-object divide, you follow it through all the way. Not just for the sake of comparison and getting the satisfaction of, look, I saw things that fit, that correspond. That's kind of not the point. That can sort of encourage you to practice, sure, but the measure of fitting, the measure of successful understanding is freedom from suffering, freedom from subjectivity in that sense. So if you thoroughly understand the salayatana, this basis, the sense organ basis, there will be no room for conceit. And whether you actually recognize that also corresponds to the subject-object divide or not, it's irrelevant. You followed it through. So that's why all these different approaches, as I said, inevitably you'll be drawing parallels and comparisons and so on, but fundamentally the practice is on the level of following it through till understanding is developed on account of it. So till the bases are endured sufficiently enough, discerned sufficiently enough, understood as unownable sufficiently enough, or subjectivity is seen as an objective phenomenon, not by making it into an object, but by seeing it's real as this subjective phenomenon that's always in the peripheral, and as such it's an objective fact that it is there. Discern that as unownable, discern that as something that cannot belong to you, cannot be in your control, and then your sense of self would diminish.
So you often translate pasa as pressure, which is also quite practical in the sense
Yeah.
of seeing that pressure as a phenomena.
Well, that's where you see. That's where you start looking, because people will read about pasa, contact, whatever you translate it, and then they think on their own terms. All right, contact, and then this happens, and it's kind of sort of laying it out, almost like a experiment in physics sort of thing. But it's completely not there. Even if you make sense of things on that level, it's just there's nothing to do with the Dhamma, because Dhamma only applies on the level that frees you from suffering. And so where is the suffering? Well, suffering is where things are felt, and that's where the pressure is. So being pressured, being touched, being under a certain weight or feeling of aggregates, that's pasa. So your contemplation then should never forget that, or put that second.
And acting out of that has to entail ignoring the past. So you might think the past has gone away because I'm acting towards craving or ill will.
Yeah, so that's like initially, like the maybe a coarser form of pressure are gone, but you recognize that even a neutral feeling, for as long as you're not fully free from avidya, will have a degree of pressure. So then you just have to refine it. But that's that kind of the practical side. The practical development is that, like, there is the contemplation, there is collecting information, but fundamentally, the basis that is necessary for any of such contemplation to apply is something that needs to be cultivated beforehand, needs to be kind of brought up to a certain fulfillment until it's sufficient, and then these things can be seen on that level. And that development, that bringing up to fulfillment, it's exactly that. It starts with the sense restraint, guarding of the sense doors. But yeah, so knowing the intentions behind your actions, that's always going to reveal a pressure as well. So if you're unsure where the pressure is, just ask yourself, what do you want to do? Where is your mind leaning towards? What is it thinking about? What is it delighting in? You'll find the pressure. You'll find the pressure as a general sort of weather, so to speak, sending you in a certain direction. It doesn't need to be like acutely felt intense pressure in your chest or something. No, it's just any form of that being under an emotional kind of touch, so to speak. It's contacting you. It's exerting its force on you, however subtle. So that's where when you recognize that, right? So feeding this, it's what's unwholesome. Yes, of course. As I said, the precepts are first taken in that external level to contain you until you start learning. But once you recognize that the root of unwholesome is really whether you feed the craving, feed the pressure or not, then like you don't need specific rules in a way, and you would certainly not be able to break other rules that are defined, because again, you if you don't act out of that pressure, if you don't act out of that craving, you can't do anything unwholesome. And the recognition lies there. So it's like I said that before. For example, I don't know, certain things might be acceptable to do, like say, oh, you can eat chocolate in the afternoon. That's allowable. It's kind of simple example. It's not against the rules. Like they're all permutations of Vinaya, all traditions agree on it. It's fine. But you see that you would be doing it for wrong reasons. Wrong reasons being anything, from boredom, craving for tastes, craving for sugar, distraction, curiosity, I don't know. But all those reasons are unnecessary reasons. So recognition here, it's like that, not like, oh, I mustn't have these thoughts or something, but it's more on the level of you recognize that you have such thoughts, you don't act out of them, you don't try to get rid of them for as long as it takes. If like 3 weeks later, still the only reason you would eat chocolate, it's still, you're unclear about it, and it's still rooted in, I just want to try it, I just want to try it, you don't do it. 5 years later, you still don't do it. Because that's the criteria. That's that being established in virtue, being established in right criteria that defines virtue. But then if in 2 days' time, like, those reasons are gone, and you need to take medicine, or you're sick or something, you eat it, it's fine. And you will know that it's fine because you saw where it comes from. So that sense of safety will be recognized. And your own mind, possessed by Mara, cannot attack you. It will try, but it won't be able to enter you because you have not acted out of that suitable basis, as in suitable for Mara, basis that's suitable for Mara's attacks. And that's how you know internally now what's right or wrong. So I gave the example, but you realize, yeah, it's on the level of the small intentions. Like another typical example would be like, I don't know, something, you hear something and you want to look in that direction. And before you do, it's like, why? Now it might be, just whatever, to prevent issues from arising or something, if it's something practical. But it might also be, I'm just curious. So you ask yourself, if you look out of such reasons, curiosity, carelessness, is there a chance that lust would invade your mind if you see something that's inciting of lust? It's like, yeah, there's probably a good chance that will happen, because what I'm about to look at is a group of people, men and women. So why would I do that? Then I won't do it. But I don't have to look at it. And then if you do have to look at it for whatever reason, you would look at it and you wouldn't think twice. And by any other reason that's not unwholesome. If somebody starts talking to you from that group, you would obviously look and talk back. But see, it was not rooted in that wrong thing. All the externally seems the same. There is no difference in that action. Either way, you looked because you spoke. But first time, you looked and spoke because you were curious or lustful or whatever. Second time is because circumstances just shaped it that way. And there is a whole world of difference internally speaking. Another good example is like when suttas often talk about it. Like you shouldn't say anything that's rooted in aversion or ill will. And before you say something that's rooted in aversion or ill will, you should reflect. Well, am I free from aversion? Is this coming from aversion? So not reflect, is this true or not? Is this going to benefit the monastery or not? That's not a factor. Those are the external factors. No. Am I coming out of place of ill will? Will what I'm about to say be factually beneficial for them, beneficial for me, beneficial for both? If those factors are not met, you don't say it. Even if the whole monastery will sort of go to ruin as a result of it. You don't say it because your criteria is your wrong intention must not be fed. And that's something, you would probably, you'll probably go through yourselves, and you might see others do. It always feels justifiable. Like there's always, people will try to apply this criteria to a certain point. They'll reflect, but then it will come, but if I don't say anything now, it's going to have big repercussions. I must say it. So then, basically what you effectively do then is like, I must put Buddha's instruction second and deal with this issue first, and then I'll get back to practicing the Buddha's instruction. And you realize that's why you never practice the Buddha's instruction. You're never taking it on. Because when it comes too much, you put it aside to deal with it and then bring it back on. And that's not the practice. Yeah.
I was going to say, like, the smallest of intentions will reveal, like, the biggest things that determine you, like your sense of self.
And also, like, once you start recognizing those subtler intentions and then not feeding them, the mind will start to rebel. Then you're going to realize how wild of an animal it actually is. How irrational it's going to become. Like, you see, it's fine, like, everything's fine, everything fits, and my practice is good. Like, what do I do next, Bhante? Well, increase sense restraint. Start saying no to yourself a bit more, and see. If your mind remains perfectly equanimous, nothing has changed, congratulations, you've finished your work. Highly unlikely that that will be the case. It's going to start to rebel, kick and scream, and even the stuff that was clear and made sense, it's all going to be abandoned, and the mind will just be a raging animal that's going to try to force you to act. Wake you up in the middle of the night, breaking in sweat, just go and act, just do it. It's be completely rational. But the criteria there, by that point, if you have been developing things rightly, you'll know. Oh, so how long I don't care how long this lasts. My problem is not the fact that a mind is a wild animal. My problem is if I act out of it and keep enabling it. That's why it's my issue. If I don't do my part, it can remain screaming and kicking for the rest of its life. You realize that's still wholesome because you are not feeding it. And obviously it can't remain kicking and screaming for the rest of life, because once you, as the suttas of taming the wild elephant repeat so often, once you pin it down, stop kind of giving in to its whims and pressures, it will kick and scream, urinate, defecate, try to kill you and so on, but it will have to come down. If the precepts are there developed beforehand, that will be its leather straps keeping it in place, and it will come down, and then it will start to listen and take food and obey. How much that elephant will kick and scream individually, that depends how wild it was before. But as I often say, I reckon today for most people it's probably pretty wild, given the just natural degrees of sensuality we all proliferated towards. So yeah, it does boil down to recognizing the little intentions, the little kind of practical things. Oh, but everybody says doing this, it's fine. The entire tradition says this is fine. Look, that's how it's done externally. I just do it like everybody else. It's like, that's not the measure of wholesome or unwholesome. That's the basically initial guideline for somebody who really can't tell where, where wholesome would even begin. But if you just stick to it thinking that's it, that's all you need to do, just externally emulate wholesome, accepted behavior norms, and not take on the internal criteria as the actual measure, you're not taking on the practice. You're not even starting it, so to speak. Yeah. And that's the unpleasant part. See, because you can have your mind revolve around something so silly or irrational for like 4 or 5 days, just constantly, because you refuse to look, or you refuse to eat that chocolate, or you refuse to act out. That's it. It's like, well, yeah, if that's what the mind does as a result of right course of action, that's what the mind does. I'll just focus on the right course of action. You don't need to be, I'll beat this mind now twice as hard or something. Strangle it. No, just, you know where the gateway is, you know where the threshold is, what you need to protect. So if there is an unwholesome intention, that's what you don't feed, you don't compromise. If there is wholesome, it's fine. Mind gets elated, mind gets depressed, doesn't matter, that's secondary. You know it as such, as this Satipatthana Sutta says. But generally, it's kind of much easier, as I said, somebody might try that, do a bit, but then after a while of that building up of that irrationality and doubt and mind trying to pressure you to act and becoming more kind of seemingly more sensitive, it's kind of easier to just then fall back into, I'll just do this. Oh, see, it wasn't a big deal. Externally, it was completely not a big deal. It was irrelevant. But internally, you just you shot yourself in the foot yet again. And I have to heal and then start again.
It's like the example with the 5 animals you're tied to. You try to hold back initially, but then it gets too painful and you just, I'll just let them go.
Yeah. There's nothing in between that you see.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. And see, if somebody starts to kind of say no on the right level, there is a chance they can discern that middle ground. But if you refuse to even take on the middle level because it's unpleasant to begin with, and just stick to, I'll let the animals go where others agreed we could feed, you're never going to take on that internal dimension of practice. That's still about Paramasa in the nutshell. You're doing you're bound by the virtue and duty in that external sense. That's why it's effectual fetter. And see, you can also see that internally, if whereby you review the intention behind some actions, and you realize, no, this is done for good purpose, for increasing my practice, for increasing solitude, for decreasing company, for decreasing lust, increasing non-lust. But others might not approve of that. They might find that disagreeable. Then, like, I won't do it. So then I'll stay in what I factually know it's not as suitable. Out of fear of being criticized or blamed by those who obviously don't value the same thing. So that's also a factor. Yeah. And why would that be a factor? Well, because internally you're afraid to be alone. You're afraid to take it on upon yourself and recognize that it's up to you and nobody else, and nobody can come in between it, which is a good news and bad news, depending on how you look at it. But if you are finding shelter and safety in the sense of camaraderie and group, in that sense, authority, external authority, or as Heidegger describes, impersonal they and them, or we just, then it's like that's a big problem, because that will prevent you from recognizing that middle ground where the actual intentions and that pasa and contact is all manifested, endured, and where you're acting from. But you recognize the middle ground, and then it's not really far-fetched when you read the suttas, when the Buddha said to some monks or nuns, just whatever you know is wholesome, cultivate; whatever you know as unwholesome, abandon it. And they became arahants as a result of that. So I was like, yeah, because they found the roots of wholesome and unwholesome, and they actually abandoned it. Means they endured things on the right level for as long as that took. Did not act, discerned, unknowability became apparent, mind tamed, things fell into place. And this practice of reviewing your actions, so as I said initially, it will be on that level. But then say you are training yourself to become, to delight in solitude, as the suttas would say, to find, actually, to prefer being alone, to not mind living with your own self and your own mind internally. That's when then the same attitude, same efforts would apply, and then you would be doing it on the level of recognizing hindrances and acting out of them, because they are obviously fundamentally internally bound. So when you are withdrawn, when you have not been acting unwholesomely by body, by speech, then yes, you're going to start seeing just sensuality on the mental level, delight on the mental level, thoughts of ill will on that mental level, sloth, fatigue, tiredness, laziness, indolence, doubt, anxiety. And same, you recognize there's a degree of pressure present, arisen, mind wants to act, get rid of it, cover it up. To that extent you don't do it, to that extent you don't deny it. And train yourself in regard to that newly discovered base, threshold, middle ground. And that's how you go beyond it. When you are firm in that middle ground, they cannot enter you anymore.
Good. Another way of describing going beyond it being to understand its nature. So if you're acting out of it, that's the antithesis of understanding its nature.
Yeah.
And
so not acting out of it,
or denying it, is
or
also
denying
the
it,
antithesis.
it's a form of acting out again. That would be the first step. Understanding the nature. I don't think you would necessarily, most people wouldn't have to make specific effort, because by that time, say if you are on the level of being able to not act out of hindrances, to see them endure on that mental level, remain composed, that's already, by that time you already know the certain nature of unknowability, dissatisfaction, and that was just going to be seen there.
You're not absorbed by the content of it, you're able to see it as a hindrance, you're able to
Yes,
understand
yeah.
it.
And the only reason you will be absorbed by the content of it is because you don't like the touch, you don't like the pressure that it has over you. So you want to get rid of that.
Yeah,
And that's how you get involved.
surmounting it is able to,
Yeah, so when you are unmoved by the pressure, means
It's
you're
no
not
longer pressure.
exactly. Yeah. So it's like, how can contact the groundless one,
Mm.
as the sutras would say. Not like, oh, contact does not appear. No, it's just there's no more ground for contact that's there to touch you.